Hello there and welcome. My name's Anthony Beardsell. I'm an NLP Master Trainer and Coach, and I'd like to welcome you to our NLP and Coaching Uncovered webinar series. This is the first of the series of webinars that we're going to be doing, and we're going to be looking to uncover some of the secrets of coaching and some of the secrets of NLP. And we're going to be looking at the practical side of things. So practically, how do you use NLP for yourself and with other people? How does it relate to coaching, to therapy, to sales, for example, as well? And so I'd love for you to be involved in these webinars, if at all possible. I'd love for you to be able to get involved. So whether you're watching on Google Plus, on the Excellence Assured website, on YouTube, you'll be able to leave comments or ask questions as we're going through the webinar. So use the comments sections in order to do that. I'm expecting this webinar to last about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. And if there's time, I'll be aiming to answer some of your questions at the end of the webinar. So do get involved. And if anything crops up, springs to mind, then ask your questions. Hopefully, people are gathering for the webinar now and we're streaming successfully to the globe. That would be great. So this particular webinar, what's this one about? This is the first in the series, and this is about, well, answering two questions really. The first is, what is NLP? And the second is, how can it help me? And these are two questions that I get asked all the time by coaching clients and also by people who are just interested in NLP. What is it and how can it help me? And NLP is essentially about creating change. It's about creating change, and it's about excellence. It's about modeling or observing and then training yourself to create excellence, because that's what modeling is. It's about watching excellence in other people and then doing it for yourself, learning it to do it for yourself, and then teaching other people, of course, as well. So that's essentially what NLP is about. And as I say, I want this to be a practical webinar, so something that you can get good value from and find useful. So I'd like to address a problem that you have over the next 40 minutes. I'd like to discuss with you a problem that you may have and see whether we can reshape the problem slightly, and it might even disappear. You never know. But we're going to investigate this problem. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to see what happens with it. So if you think, or if you bring to mind now a small problem that you have, just a small problem that you have, and if you're struggling to think of anything, then why not just think about this? Just think about, what's not perfect in my life right now, and notice what springs to mind. And if it's a fairly small thing, then just think about that thing now and use that as your problem. You got something? Thank you. I'm also going to use an example scenario, an example problem, which is I'm having problems with my relationship with my boss. And this is a problem that comes up quite frequently in coaching my clients. And it's also been a problem that I had in the past before I started Excellence Assured, of course. So we're going to be looking to add value to you by investigating your problem. And I'm going to use the problem of the relationship with the boss as an example for you, so you can understand how the process is actually working. Okay, so NLP is quite a big subject these days. And Richard Bandler described NLP as an attitude, a methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. So when he mentions attitude, what do you think the attitude might be that would be useful in order to create change? What do you think it might be, the attitude? Because for me, curiosity is something that would be really useful in bringing about some kind of change. Curiosity. And I'm not just talking about being sort of slightly curious. I'm talking about being really curious. And Richard Bandler, who's one of the co-creators of NLP, called it wanton curiosity. Really, really curious. And I remember a time, the first time I was really, really curious. I remember a time when I was a child and we had one of those big television sets back in the day. They used to have those. One of those big television sets with a big back on it. It was really thick, really wide, really deep, this television set. And the screen wasn't that big, but everything else about it was big. And there were people who were on the screen and they were talking, and I was watching this and I was thinking, my goodness, you know, how is this actually happening? There's people on the screen and they're talking, and what's inside this television set that means that it can produce these pictures? And obviously I was old enough to know that there weren't people inside the television. It was big, but it wasn't that big. And so I crept behind the television set when nobody was looking. I crept behind and I looked down and I saw it had a black casing on the back of the television set, and it had those air vents, the slots like air vents. I had a look through one of those and I could see these wires in there. I could see these wires and lots of shiny bits. And I thought, wow, you know, what's inside that television set? And that's the sort of curiosity that I'm talking about. And in terms of people, NLP encourages you to not necessarily just look at somebody and watch their behavior and think, you know, that's not behavior that I'm particularly impressed with. That person must be an idiot. NLP encourages you, as you would imagine in a coaching environment, to be useful, to look at people and think, you know, what on earth is going on inside that person? You know, it's fundamentally a great person, same as myself, and how are they producing that sort of behavior? What's going on inside that person in order to produce that behavior? So let's have a little look at this. That's the sort of curiosity that I'm talking about using and being required in NLP, and that's what it's about. So when I talked about the television set, was that the kind of picture that you had in mind? It's interesting, isn't it, how people have different interpretations. The words that I used to describe the TV set, did they describe that one for you? We'll have a look at perceptions again in a minute. So this is Richard Bandler, and Richard Bandler said, NLP is an attitude and methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. So curiosity is one of those attitudes. And if you think about your own particular problem now that we're going to experiment with, in order to play around with it, you know, just think and get really curious about this problem and just wonder to yourself now, how does this problem exist? How is it possible that it still exists? How is it possible that I haven't done something about it already? How does it exist? What shape is it? How does it look? Really get inside the problem and try and represent it to yourself in your mind's eye. Cause is greater than effect is what we've got on the screen, and this is an equation. So everything in life has a cause and everything has an effect. So something happens which is the cause, and it affects. There's an effect which is it affects other people. And so if you're coaching, if you have a problem, then which side of the equation would you think that your problem might sit at? Because most people are at effect over their problem. They're not at cause. And being at cause means that you determine the outcome yourself and you take ownership of your problem. You take responsibility for your problem and for your life. So at any one moment, you can choose to be at cause rather than at effect. And it takes noticing where you are to enable you to change, but you can change immediately. Being at effect means that you're blaming your problem on somebody else. and or something else. You know, the economy is a problem. That's why I can't do any business. Somebody keeps ringing me up, so I can't get the work done. It's somebody else's problem. And you can always put yourself at cause. At a stretch, you can always cause. So again, think about the problem that you have and just think now, are you at effect or are you at cause with this problem? And decide to move and to rest at cause. Take ownership of the problem and just think now, when you think about the problem, your problem, what can you do? How can you take ownership? How can you influence this problem so that it goes away now? What can you do about it yourself? The problem that I mentioned, which is I've got problems in my relationship with my boss. You know, is it the boss that's the problem, or is it me that's the problem? I have problems with my boss. There's a certain amount of cause in there, but the boss might be causing a problem in my mind when I think about it. So what can I do to solve this problem? How can I make the relationship better? How can I communicate better to make the relationship better? Take ownership for your problems. So NLP has been around since the beginning of the 1970s. However, the content of NLP is something that's been around significantly longer. And the gentleman in the picture is a guy called Alfred Korzybski, or Korzybski. And Alfred Korzybski was really general semantics, and he wrote the book Science Insanity. And what he actually said was that human knowledge of the world is limited by the nervous system and by the language. And so we can't have direct access to reality. The most that we can know is that which is filtered through the brain's responses to reality. It's filtered through the brain's responses to reality. And so what he's saying is that everybody's reality is slightly different because it's filtered through our individual minds. And he coined the phrase, the map is not the territory, which has been adopted by NLP. And the map is not the territory says that I've got a different map to you, and it's not the exact replica of reality because we all put our own spin on it. Let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. So this is the NLP communication model. This is a person having an event, of a life event occurring, could be anything in life. And so the information, they take information in, people, you and I, take information in through our senses. We take information in through our eyes, nose, ears, mouth, and through touch. And then the information's filtered. So it's filtered by our values, our beliefs, our decisions, memories, and language. The language that we use filters the information. And as a result of the filtering, we then produce an internal representation. So we represent the information that we're taking in through our senses to ourselves in the form of some kind of picture, sound, feeling, taste, or smell. And that is intimately linked with our state of mind and with our physiology, how we're standing, how we're sitting. So that in turn, all of that in turn brings about a behavior. And this is an automatic process, of course. So we take information in, we process that information in our unconsciously, automatically in our mind filtering system, and we produce an internal representation, which, as I say, could be a picture, it could be sounds, could be feelings, tastes, and smells. It's what you see in your mind's eye when you think of something. And it also, that's the internal representations coupled with a state of mind and a physiology, and all of that produces a behavior. And it's the internal representations that you make that I want you to think about in terms of your own problem, and that are really important of NLP. So in NLP, we work with internal representations that people have, we influence them, as you would do as a coach. You influence people's internal representations to help them to overcome their problems and get better behavior. So NLP was co-created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder in the early 70s. And actually, Bandler and Grinder modeled 3 people. So when I say modeled, what they did was they investigated what they were doing in their work and they copied them, or they figured out how they were doing what they were doing, and they replicated the ability to do their work within themselves. So the chap on the left, Fritz Perls, was the first to be modeled, then Virginia Satir and Milton Erickson. 3 therapists in different fields. Fritz Perls was modeled by Bandler, first of all, by Bandler, and this was before NLP actually came about. And Bandler saw Fritz Perls doing some Gestalt therapy and thought, gosh, he's getting some fantastic results. What's he doing? And he figured out what he was doing, and he did it himself, and he ran Gestalt therapy classes and taught other people how to do it. And people said that he did such a good job with his modeling that he was actually better at it, better at Gestalt therapy, and better at being Fritz Perls than Fritz Perls was. That's what modeling's all about. It's learning how to do something that creates excellence, doing it yourself, and then teaching other people. 3-stage process. And Fritz Perls was an expert in Gestalt therapy. And he noticed that, and he said that the core of the Gestalt therapy process is enhanced awareness of perception, feelings, emotions, and behavior in the present moment. So what does that mean, and how's that easy picture that we saw? So in terms of your perceptions are the internal representations, aren't they? They're the pictures, sounds, and feelings, and tastes and smells that you have in your head. And when you think of a memory, you bring back an internal representation of a previous event, and that is your perception of that particular event. So he's saying that you can get more knowledge of your perceptions, of your feelings and emotions, and therefore understand your problems better. And he noticed that when people did that, their problems disappeared. So just think now for a second, what internal representations are you bringing about with regard to, or do you, when you think of your problem, what sort of pictures come to mind? What sounds come to mind? What feelings come to mind? What tastes and smells come to mind when you think now about the problem that we're addressing today? What internal representations do you get? The internal representation is vital in NLP. Now, what's this a picture of? What springs to mind? There's a vase. It looks like a vase to me. It did first time I saw it. Anything else? And your mind's probably searching away for what else it looks like. And you might have spotted that as well as looking like a rather elegant vase, it also looks, you can see 2 people looking at each other, 2 heads in the white. You got that? And that's what more knowledge can do to your perception. So it's important to know that you can have a different perception with with new knowledge. And this is what NLP does, is it takes a problem and it gives us more information on the problem, and it allows coaches to have a method to gain information on problems to bring about change. That's what we do. And we use language in order to influence the internal representations that you see on the left here. Okay, so then once Bandler had finished modeling Fritz Perls, he modeled Virginia Satir, and he and Grinder modeled Satir, and Grinder actually modeled Bandler being Satir because he was that good at doing it, apparently. And Virginia Satir was a family therapist, so she helped families get over their problems. And they noticed when they were modeling Virginia Satir that the questions that she asked people were really specific. So they were getting really specific in the problem and detailed. And so she would ask people would tell her what the problem was. She'd ask them loads of questions and the problem would disappear. Just like that, the problem just disappeared. And so people would ask, would say something like, he hurts me. And she would say, how does he hurt you? What does hurt mean to you? Get really specific and detailed. What is hurt specifically? What do you mean by hurt specific? And by getting specific in this way, she enabled the problem to disappear. So why would she get specific? Why would she get into the detail of the problem? Well, there's a lot of information coming into our senses that we take in certainly when we've got our eyes open. Every second we've got between 2 and 11 million bits of information going into our heads, into our brains. 10 of those 11 million bits through our eyes, apparently. So a lot of information, and we can't cope with that amount of information. So our brains delete, distort, and generalize the information using our values, beliefs, decisions, memories, and language. So again, we filter the information so that it then eventually gives us a picture, an internal representation, or so that we have a perception of what the information that we're taking in, which is limited to 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information, or 50 odd bits. So it goes down from perhaps 11 million bits of information down to 50 bits of information just through our filtering, our deletion, distortion, and generalization. So those bits of information, when we speak and when we language a problem, when we talk about a problem, we might not be talking about the things that are inside the problem and the real reason for the problem. We might just be, we will already have deleted a lot of the problem, and we may only explain a very small amount of the problem. So by asking questions, being specific like Virginia Satir did, we're able to get inside the problem and find out more about it. And in that way, the problem can disappear. So if you think about this problem, I have problems in my relationship with my boss. What's been deleted in that statement there? Well, I've got problems. What sort of problems? How are they problems? You mentioned your relationship with your boss. Is it all of the relationship with your boss? How is your relationship with your boss? When you talk about the relationship, are you talking about a working relationship? Who is your boss? Okay, those sort of questions. So digging into the words, digging in just to discover what's missing. So the third person to get modeled by Bandler and Grinder was Milton Erickson. And Milton Erickson was a hypnotherapist. He was into psychotherapy. And they modeled and they watched Milton Erickson at work, and they noticed that he used artfully vague language and hypnosis in order to get the same results as Virginia Satir. And they started thinking, hang on a minute. So both Virginia Satir and Milton Erickson get great results with their clients. Virginia Satir gets really detailed, and Milton Erickson uses artfully vague language and hypnosis. This is really puzzling. What's going on here? And Milton Erickson, when you talk about hypnosis is essentially working with the unconscious mind, the unconscious part of your mind, to effect change. So the hypnotist puts somebody to sleep almost and talks to them, and the problem disappears. And that's in effect what Milton Erickson was doing. So Milton Erickson believed that there was definitely a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, and they were very separate. Your conscious mind, you think with rationally, and you make decisions with, and you're probably thinking with now, and you're listening with that now. You'll probably also be listening with your unconscious mind, but you won't be aware of that. And Milton Erickson said he could create a sense of rapport between himself and the patient, which by observing them really carefully, and that's called sensory acuity in NLP, by watching them really carefully, he could, and talking to them in a certain way, he could create rapport with the person and with their unconscious mind, so that basically it relaxed their conscious mind. He was able to talk to their unconscious or subconscious, and therefore he had access to the unconscious, subconscious resources, which were all powerful. So he used rapport in order to do that. And what he would do is he would just tell people a story, tell people a metaphor. So he'd work out, because he would definitely, with Milton Erickson, he was keen on outcomes. So he would ask the patient what the matter was, what the problem was. He would figure out with them what they'd rather have instead of the problem. And he would then tell a story that was not the same, but similar to the problem, and had a successful outcome, and they would change. And the change took place at the unconscious level. So they would walk into his surgery and he would talk to them for an hour, tell them a story, and they'd walk out and they'd think, what on earth happened there? He just talked about himself and told a story for an hour. Anyway, oh, my problem seems to have disappeared. And that's what happened. And he did that with between 6 and 8 people a day for 60 years. So he got really, really good at this. And Bandler and Grinder modeled him and incorporated what they learned, into NLP. So NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. The neuro's to do with the mind. And so we take information in through our sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. It goes into our mind. And that purple thing there is a picture of the unconscious mind, deep inside. So the information goes in, it gets filtered by our values. The values are things that are important to us. Beliefs, decisions. Beliefs could be inherited from mum and dad, or from friends, or other influences. Decisions that you make. So we filter them, we delete, we distort, we generalize, and then we create internal representations. So think again about your problem and think what internal representation, what pictures are created in your head by the thought of your problem. Are there any feelings associated with it? What do you get there? And get really curious and start thinking about taking responsibility, because we're going to dig deep into the problem and have a look at it in a bit more detail. One thing to bear in mind with the internal representations is that the mind doesn't process negatives directly. So you need to be really careful when you're giving instruction to yourself, let's say through self-talk. You need to give really careful attention to what you're saying and how the language that you're using. And when you're talking to other people, by using your language, what internal representations are you creating with them? Because the mind doesn't process negatives directly. An illustration here is, I saw this in a subway in Melbourne in Australia, underneath the river. So do not spit, and look what's all over the sign. Obviously people ignored it, or not, maybe they read it, because what happens is you read do not spit and you think, oh, spitting. I mean, obviously I wouldn't do it, but some people do. So your mind doesn't process a negative directly. So what I don't want you to think about now is a blue tree. So don't think of a blue tree. Did you think of a blue tree? You probably did, because your unconscious mind can't process negatives. It hears the instruction blue tree, it misses out the don't, and it creates an internal representation of a blue tree. So you need to be really careful with your language. Another illustration. It's icy out. Don't fall, he says to the young lady. And what does she do? She creates an internal representation of falling over. That could make her more likely, of course, to fall over. It's icy outside, watch your footing. There's no negative in there, and that's going to be much better for her. And it's likely to produce an internal representation in her of her watching her footing. So think on the left here about your internal representations. And there's a self-talk. We'll add self-talk in, because that also is an internal representation. Think about how the messages that you're sending to yourself, what do you say when you look in the mirror? How they might be affecting you. If you think, an internal representation might be a picture. sound, a feeling, whatever. Some people think, well, I can't make pictures in my mind. And you can. It just takes practice sometimes with people, and you get better the more you practice. So if you're struggling with that, have a look in a mirror at yourself and close your eyes. And when you close your eyes, bring back the picture that you were looking at in the mirror. So what the image that you were looking at in the mirror, bring that back. And the better you get at it, the easier you're able to get into the detail, and you soon start being able to remember things like skin color and blemishes and things like that. Think about, so you might want to close your eyes now, a big red apple like this. You can close your eyes if you like, because I'm going to get you to imagine now this big red apple, and I want you to hold it in your hand. Imagine yourself holding this in your hand, and it's smooth and waxy and soft. It's like silky on the outside. And hold it to your nose. So bring the apple to your nose and notice what it smells like. It smells appley. Take a bite out of it. Take a bite out of it and notice the juices and the real lovely appley taste that you get, the sweet appley taste. Notice that as well. And is your mouth watering? Because I know mine is. I've rehearsed this several times, and what I've actually done is I've anchored in the mouth watering. All I have to do is look at a picture of an apple, at this picture of an apple, and my mouth starts watering automatically. And that is called anchoring in NLP, of course. Do your mouth water? So NLP's moved on from where it was in the... A lot of the stuff that's being learned in neurogenetics and neurobiology confirms what we already know in NLP, and that's, we've got billions and billions of neurons in our body, not just in our brain. We used to think they were just in the brain, but they're not. They're all over our body, and they transmit chemicals to each other. So the feel-good chemical of dopamine, if you create positive thoughts, you're likely to send dopamine rushing throughout your system, and it's going to make you feel better. That's just how it works. So think about your self-talk, and think about the internal representations that you're making as you go about your day, as you communicate with other people. Okay, so thinking about more uses and thinking about your problem again. So just bring back to mind the problem that you thought of earlier. And let's have a look at, Virginia Satir would look inside the problem. So I want you to look inside your problem now and look at the detail of it. And just, what does the problem consist of? How could you be right? How could you be wrong about it? How could you change part of it to give yourself control of the problem and put yourself at cause? And look behind the problem and notice what's behind the problem. And the questions that are available in NLP to help people to do that is, and they're called the meta model in NLP. Milton Erickson looked outside the problem. So he would say, okay, so we've got specific, we've got detailed, we've discovered what actually is the real problem, the problem behind the problem. Well, we know what that is now. So, okay, so let's look outside the problem for our solution. And he would look, what's bigger than the problem? Well, does the problem affect all areas of your life? And if it doesn't, then actually, how big a part is it? We tend to sit inside our problems, but the language that Milton Erickson used, which has been incorporated into NLP and is now called the Milton model, enables you to ask questions that take your neurology outside of the problem, and you realize that there are much bigger things than the problem itself. What is the problem just affecting one context of your life, for example, your work or your home life or your health, or what else is there outside of the problem? And that's what Milton Erickson did. So I have problems in relationship with my boss was my example. So get specific and go inside, and what's problems specifically, which part of your relationship with your boss is that a problem with, and then go outside the problem and say, okay, well, in general, how do you get on with your boss? Has there always been a problem in your relationship? What specific, again, get detailed, what specific part of the relationship? Okay, so you fluctuate between using the meta model and the Milton model, using the techniques of a family therapist, Virginia Satir, and a hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson. This takes practice, but hopefully we're shifting some sort of thinking in your mind, the internal representations that you have in your mind over your problem. Okay, so let's have a look at this then. The event that you have that creates the behavior, the information that you take in, the process between there and producing the behavior is automatic. And as you can see here, you can actually provide a stimulus in the form of an internal representation, which creates an automatic behavior. So if I said to you, again, using a negative, here's a book, it's really personal to me, I want you to look after it because I trust you, but don't look inside it, then what internal representation do you think is that creating? To me, it creates an internal representation of look inside it. What's inside? It's really important. What's going on? And so you can stimulate other people's their interpretations in their mind by the words that you use, and you can also touch them and use that as a stimulus for their behavior as well. This might sound a little bit to you like anchoring if you know some NLP already. So anchoring is providing a stimulus, and for that stimulus to automatically produce behavior that you would prefer to have. So you can identify an area of your life where you have behavior that you're not fond of, and you can change the way that you react in situations like that in order to produce better behavior. And this is anchoring comes from the work of Twitmeyer and Pavlov in the early 1900s. And Twitmeyer was the knee-jerk guy. Twitmeyer was a therapist, and a doctor, and he used to tap his patients on the knee with a rubber hammer, and he noticed their knee would move when he tapped them on the knee. And then he noticed that if he just pretended to tap them on the knee and had his hammer and just pretended to tap them on the knee, the leg would still move. So he provided a stimulus and had an automatic behavior, which was that the leg moved. And Pavlov, around about the same time, just slightly after Twitmeyer, he was the chap who rang a bell and provided a steak for some dogs, and then the dogs would salivate when the bell rang. He noticed they would salivate, and then they got their meat, and he repeated this several times, and he rang the bell, and the dogs came along and they were salivating, and he didn't provide any meat and they still salivated. And so he realized that there's this automatic response. So you could create a stimulus and you would get a certain behavior as a result of it. And NLP uses this knowledge to create anchoring. So you can create verbal or kinesthetic or anchors that are created by touching somebody in a place, and you can anchor, you can change your state of mind easily in this particular way. Okay, so in this particular example, we're looking at creating excellence. And so people who create excellence, and NLP is about modeling people who create excellence. It's about creating excellence from less good behavior. And so you can people who create excellence very often create it automatically. So they will have rather than just one internal representation which creates excellence, they'd have a series of internal representations that go through their head. That means they then get the excellent behavior. And that's called a strategy in NLP. And what we realized is that you could actually change the internal representations. If you found out what the internal representations were by asking somebody, you could change your own internal representations to match that person. So if you had a problem, you could change your own internal representations and you could get your outcome. And so in this way, let's say you've got behavior which is a phobia, you could change the sequence of internal, what's going on in the mind, representations, and get a better outcome for yourself and get rid of your phobia. That's what NLP can help you do. What we also noticed is that you could actually just change the first internal representation, and all the other internal representations would automatically change. And this is called submodality work, and this is called, and one of the submodality patterns in NLP is the swish pattern, which you... Submodalities are the finer details of the pictures and the sounds and the feelings that you get in your internal representation. Okay, so let me just come back to this here, and hopefully you can see me again now. So what I'd like to finish off with here is I'd like you to think about the outcome that you'd rather have instead of the problem that we've been talking about. So you've got your problem, you've got an internal representation of your problem, and that essentially that's the proof, let's call it. So you've got a picture of that. What would you rather have as your outcome other than your problem? What would you rather have happen? Can you picture that happening? Could you put yourself in the picture? You might need to close your eyes in order to do this. Just picture what it would be like to not have see yourself overcoming the problem, and what it would be like to not have the problem, and how it feels, and what you're listening to. Are you hearing anybody else involved in this? Are there any tastes or smells in the representation for you? And that's, I'm going to call that your desired state. So really turn that up and get to know it. So this is your outcome. That's what you're going to be aiming for. Notice as you think about that you feel better about the problem. Okay, so eyes open again. So we're going to say, here is your present state. That's your problem. That's your outcome, your solution, your desired state. And I'm going to just help you to move the problem slightly. If it's not already gone, we're going to shift it a little bit further in your neurology. So bring to mind the problem. Bring to mind the internal representation of the problem, the picture. Just remember what picture you had and bring that to mind. And you can close your eyes again for this. And so bring that problem in front of your face, right up in front of you. So it's staring you in the face, big, bright. Notice how horrible that feels, having it there right in front of you, in front of your mind's eye. And take the picture and zoom it out into the top corner of the room. Just zoom it out, really make it small as you zoom it out. Take the color out of it, make it all gray, dark and gray. And notice how you feel about the problem now. Probably feeling better. Now, bring your outcome, the picture of your outcome, bring that into mind, and make it really big, make it a big picture. See yourself not having the problem, see yourself achieving your desired outcome, see yourself in the picture, and notice how you feel. Notice any smells, any tastes associated with it. And bring that right up in front of you, make it all colourful, and notice how good you feel having that outcome there. And thank you very much. Open your eyes. Now, I've gone on a little bit longer than I'd anticipated during this webinar. So we're up to 45 minutes already. I was going to answer some questions in person, but what I'll do is I'll actually either create a video. I think I'll create a video answering some of the questions that have been asked. So you've got that, and I'll post that out to people by email if you've registered with us. Otherwise, I'll put it up on the web page on the website. So Excellence Assured Webinars, if you Google that, then you'll get that web page. So I'll answer your questions there. I'd just like to say thanks ever so much for joining me. I hope you found this interesting and useful. If you're on one of our NLP training courses, then I'll catch you later. If you're thinking about doing some NLP, then take a look at our NLP training courses on the website. You can go on to NLP Training Online or join us live. And I hope that you found this useful. Do drop me a note and let me know how you've got on. And if you've got any questions, you can still write any questions and I'll answer them over the next 24 hours now. Thank you ever so much for your attention and good night.